Welcome back to our horror podcast segment, Nightmare Network, where real people call in and share their stories and paranormal encounters. Today, we continue with Hannah's scary stories and paranormal encounters. Take it away, Hannah.
Thanks. Thanks for having me back. Um, I'd like to share with you a story a friend of mine told me. Back during the days of Pokemon Go, I would ride around Houston with these police officers while they were off duty, and one of them told me we would all play Pokemon Go together in Houston. One of them told me the scariest thing he had ever encountered while on duty was they got a call about the sound of a crying baby coming from a house that had been abandoned for over 10 years. Nobody
Oh
had lived
wow.
a long time. So they show up. When they first got there, they talked to the neighbors who called in, and they could hear the crying baby coming from that house. So the house was all locked up, so they had to figure out a way to get in. My friend figured out that the garage door was unlocked, and inside the garage was just a ton of random stuff, just like a bunch of random stuff. So as he crawled, they thought, well, maybe the crying baby noise is coming from some of the stuff that's in this garage. But they didn't hear the crying baby sound anymore, and they had to check to see if there was a baby in the house. They just had to. So they crawled over this giant pile of stuff in the garage. The garage door to the house was unlocked. That's how they got in. They unlocked the front door. They all went in. They looked throughout the entire house. It was like it was frozen in time. The furniture was everything was nice and neat inside the house. The furniture was in pristine condition. It was like it was just a frozen moment in time from a decade ago. They searched throughout the entire house. They found no source of the crying baby. They were at the front door. They were talking about it, and they were about to leave. And then all of a sudden, from the kitchen behind them was this loud BAM! All of them pulled out their guns and turned toward the kitchen and yelled at the kitchen, "Show yourself! Who's there?" They were they looked around in the kitchen and couldn't find a source of the sound. They were all very freaked out. So they quickly left the house after that. The neighbors, nobody heard any more crying baby noises since the police officers had arrived. So they locked the house up again. They closed the garage and they left. It was about just like almost right after he left, they got another call in from a different neighbor saying they heard a crying baby coming from the abandoned house across from them. And he had got a different call about a drunk driver, so he couldn't go and look at that house again. But apparently that was the scariest thing that had ever happened to him, was just that very loud, sudden bang coming from the kitchen, and they could not figure out what it was. I mean, it must have been really startling for police officers to just all pull their guns out and point their guns toward the kitchen all at once.
Yeah.
That's creepy. Um, I actually have a story about something like that. Um, I was probably around like 17, and in my dad's house, there's two rooms that face the backyard. And, I was trying to go to sleep. It was pretty late, probably like 12 around there. And I heard the same thing. Out of nowhere, I heard a baby crying. What sounded like was either in our backyard or the neighbor's backyard. And, so I sit up, I look through the window, I can't really see anything. It was pitch black, and my dad had a bunch of trees in the back, like fruit trees, so it was really hard to see anything. So then a few seconds later, I'd say maybe like 20 seconds later, it stops. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Just maybe the neighbor, they have a baby now, or someone's staying over with the baby. So I just disregarded it. And maybe 5 minutes after, again, but this time it sounded closer. And I was like, okay, there's something going on here. That's not normal. So I'm just looking out the window to see if I see anything. Maybe somebody jumped over the fence, they have a kid or something. I don't know. So I'm just sitting there, and towards the back side of the yard, my dad has a huge guava tree. So then I just see the tree start to shake. And I'm like, what? Like, what's going on back there? And so as the tree shakes, I start to see what looks like a cat. And I'm like, it's the cat. Sometimes cats, when they're meowing a certain way, they sound like babies. So I'm like, whatever. So I'm still looking out, waiting to see where this cat goes. And like, I wanted to actually see him make that sound, be able to hear it. And so I'm sitting there. And then next thing you know, the lemon tree starts to shake. And I'm like, that's not the cat. Like, this is something else. And as it goes towards the middle of the yard, it just shifts into a massive shadow. And then when I seen that, like, it just got really, really cold. And at this time, I think it was in the middle of the summer, so it's not gonna get cold in the middle of the summer. Um, so I'm like, all right, it wasn't my first time seeing things, so I wasn't scared or anything. I was just like, uh, what now? Like, what is it now? And so I saw that, and I was like, okay, whatever. And I'm like, I'm just gonna go to sleep. I have school tomorrow, and it's already late. So then I just lay down, turn around, face the wall, and a few seconds later, I hear scratching on the window. And, I sat up, I look out, and I'm like, nothing there. And I was like, okay. So I guess since it didn't feel that fear, or, I kind of disregarded it, it just went away. Like whatever it was, it just took off because, I was like, I'm not gonna give into this. Like, at one, I've seen too many things already, and I know what's out there. I'm not gonna fear it. There's no reason for me to fear it. But yeah, that's it's a scary thing to hear something like that. Whether it's something paranormal or something natural, especially coming from an abandoned house. Like, how does that even happen? Especially if that house was boarded up, and if it happened again after they left, I'm sure the neighbors were looking out to see if they had seen something after the police took off. But yeah, that's pretty scary. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, it's creepy. I was kind of thinking, what are those things called? Those mimics or something? You think maybe like that's like a possibility too?
Yeah, that can also be a possibility. As
What,
shapeshifters.
Hmm.
what do you think the slam noise was?
Well, if this was something paranormal, it was definitely in, a spirit or demonic being making itself present. And, those spirits that are strong and they don't fear humans, they'll do that. They'll do something very unsettling to cause that fear and make themselves known. Um, and so after that, after the second time, did they ever go back, or was it just like a one-time deal?
It was a one-time deal. He never heard any follow-up about it.
Do you think maybe they didn't ask because it freaked them out that bad, or was it just like wasn't it at the top of their priority list?
It wasn't at the top of their priority. I mean, they're Houston cops. They have a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
Plus,
that makes sense.
I don't think he could figure out who arrived to the second call either. So, some others, if you like, I can share some stories with you that Jackson shared with me, my boyfriend, that happened to him in that Nacogdoches house.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, one thing is saw a panther in the yard multiple times. Like the whole house was like surrounded by woods and then the street, but it was pretty far away from the street. And he swore he saw a panther, like a very, very large black cat with a very long tail. He swore up and down that there is a panther living in these woods somewhere. And I was like, there aren't any panthers in Texas. I even had to look it up because I was second guessing it. But no, there are no.
And I'm pretty sure, besides, like the research, if there was any sort of livestock in the area, there would be a lot of reports of animal attacks and all that type of stuff. So I'm sure that at that point, the what do you call them? The wilderness people would have gone out and tried to look for it or something.
I was thinking, I even considered calling somebody, but I never personally saw the panther myself. Something that contributes, to the stress of that household and the suffering that occurred in that home was Jackson had to take care of his grandmother on her deathbed. She lived during her final years. She was in a hospital bed and she was suffering from severe dementia. And she told Jackson multiple times that she would see shadows moving through the house and her past loved ones crawling on the ceiling, looking at her.
Oh, wow, that's creepy. That's the first time I've heard of that one.
Going on the wall. Yeah, that'd be.
Yeah, like especially people family. That's yeah, that's creepy.
Um, this was during the time it was very hard. They had no electricity. It was winter, and all they had to eat were like cans of soup and beans and stuff like that. So while he was, taking care of his bedridden grandmother, while they have no electricity, no heat, she's also, and no lights, she's telling him these things. It made it really hard. It was a very difficult time for him.
Yeah, that's as it is, having to take care of his grandma while she's not having a good time is difficult, on its own. And then having to deal with something that, most people don't understand, or something that can also physically, mentally, and spiritually harm you. It's, yeah, that's very difficult. And, obviously he's still here, so that's a good thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of things that a lot of people go through. Some people don't like to share just because how difficult it is to share, and we understand that, and that's why we appreciate you coming on our show and telling us your stuff. Um, but that's something that I would say a lot of people may see when they're in that type of state. Um, my grandma, when she passed away, it was the same thing. She said, like, she was, on her last breaths, and she could barely speak, but the last thing she said was that she was seeing like shadow creatures in the corners of the room. And yeah, that's pretty scary.
You think like when we're like on our deathbed and stuff, like the veil becomes extra thin to see into that other, say, dimension?
Yeah, I think so, because it's almost like when we go to sleep, we're going into that state where our mind's going to sleep, but our subconscious still there. And, that's how people are able to have lucid dreaming or stuff like that in the spiritual world. And, I think it's kind of the same thing when people are, in their last times of being alive, is the veil comes off between the physical and the spiritual world. So they might start to experience the paranormal, but at that point, it's not so much paranormal anymore. It's, the next life, and, with that, I can't say much because everyone has different beliefs. I'll leave it at that. But, that's to me, it's a big possibility for that to happen because, it's a different world. And if you're about to step into that world, I think it's kind of like, welcoming, like you're going into that world and you're leaving the physical world behind.
I imagine it'd be quite a relief too. And as the veil lifts, maybe it makes things more welcoming. But all of that suffering that occurred, that mirror in the hallway saw it. That same mirror that we would see, like in the out of the corner of my eye, that weird little brown thing running past it. Maybe they all have something to do with each other. But that house wasn't the only place where I experienced paranormal activity. Well, not my experience, but my roommates in my apartment before I moved in with my boyfriend, they told me about how sometimes they would be walking through the apartment. Now, this apartment was pet friendly. They did have one dog. It was like a medium sized dog. She was like a blondish brownish color. And my roommates told me about how sometimes they would be walking through the apartment and then just like stop because they thought that they were about to trip over the dog. They could have sworn the dog was right in front of them all of a sudden. And they look down and the dog's not there. And they look around and the dog is either on the couch or in the bedroom on a bed. And this actually occurred multiple times for each of my roommates. And it freaked them out to the point where they put up a camera in the living area and in the hallway. And the living area camera would occasionally pick up, it turns on because of a motion sensor and starts recording when it detects motion. And it detected orbs.
Are
And
those the videos that you sent me with the
yeah,
orbs on them?
yeah,
Okay.
welcome to include it in your video too.
Okay, yeah, I'll include them in the video so they can see them and see what you're talking about. But yeah, please explain the orb videos.
The orbs, well, one of the videos, it looks like it's coming from the side and then it twirls around and goes towards the camera and then up. That is actually, it's coming out of my room into the living room and then goes up into our upstairs neighbor's apartment. That one was the one that freaked me out the most, the fact that it was coming out of my room. The other one, when I first saw them, I'm like, oh, those are probably, like flies or something. But after watching them a couple of times and, being pretty aware, I garden quite a bit. I'm pretty familiar with the way bugs fly around. They don't look like the way bugs move, in my opinion.
No, definitely not. In the first video of the orb you're talking about that goes from your room up to the neighbors, not just the movement itself, but the way the orb looks. It looks like a pretty big orb that if you look closely at the video, you can actually see dust particles at the same time. And the size comparison of the actual orb versus the dust particles, the orb's like 10 times bigger than the dust.
Yeah, it was a really,
And what was that?
I said it was a really good size.
Yeah, it was pretty big. And, at times you can actually see the orb kind of shift color. So, dust particles will only reflect whatever light, but unless the light is colored, it's not going to reflect a different color. It's just going to be, you know, gray or whatever color it comes out. I'm colorblind, so all I saw was shifting colors. I don't know if they're the right ones that I saw, but but yeah, that's very interesting, and the videos are interesting. I'll post the videos up too, and so they can see for themselves.
As far as stories about what my friends have told me about their experiences, that concludes what all I've been told. I do have some stories from my childhood to share with you too.